Welcome to another episode of Civil Rhetoric. Today, my guest is going to be Lane Rasberry. Lane Rasberry and I are going to be discussing I guess gender terms are going to be, again, not applicable. We're going to be discussing how we personally define masculinity and femininity. And if there is any type of polarity that exists within, the sexes, the genders, whatever word anyone feels more comfortable with using or saying. So, Lane, we'll go ahead and introduce yourself, plug anything that you have and would be willing to plug, and let's let the crowd and everyone else know who you are.
Thanks so much for having me, Larry. So, my name's Lane Rasberry. I'm a data scientist at the School of Data Science at the University of Virginia. I do deal with gender labels in my day-to-day work and research at the university. I do research related to Wikipedia. I'm also very active in Wikipedia. And in Wikipedia, I'm a coordinator on a governance committee for something called Wikimedia LGBT, the LGBT community in Wikipedia. And the reason why I think that's relevant to your show is because you're talking about definitions of gender and sexuality, masculinity, femininity. And Wikipedia is a media publication that has articles on these concepts. And we also let anyone edit. Wikipedia is an encyclopedia that anyone can edit. And so we invite anybody to come to our article on man, woman, masculinity, femininity, other aspects of sexuality and gender, edit these kinds of things so that we can represent all these different perspectives. So happy to talk to you about any of this from a Wikipedia perspective or how this relates to issues in data science.
Really looking forward to this conversation. I've noticed with previous guests that I've discussed this with, it's kind of leaned more towards the emotional side, and I myself, I do sit more on the logical side, and I think that we're going to have that in common. I'm really looking forward to this, so I'll jump right into it if you don't mind.
Please.
Uh, how would you define masculinity?
In my day to day life, the way, so let's see. Personally, I identify as male, and this comes up in conversation a lot. I go in LGBT spaces, and it's a custom here in the United States for people in LGBT spaces to identify their gender pronouns. So when I'm in a group of mixed gender, sexual orientation, it's important for me to say, my name is Lane Rasberry. I use he, him pronouns. How I define this, it's personal identity. I feel that I wear masculine clothes, have a masculine appearance. There's certain hobbies that I pick up that are masculine. Personally, identify as masculine, and then also I'll give a professional definition of masculinity and femininity. I explore in in the course of data science and in the course of Wikipedia editing and governance the way that funding, meaning jobs or grants or opportunities or access to money, is a different experience if you're masculine or feminine. And overall, there's a data trend, and maybe you've heard about gender pay gaps, where some people say in certain industries that if you're female, you get paid less than when you're male. I look at data in different ways where masculinity and femininity plays out, where it sure seems like, based on the evidence we have in front of us, that masculine presenting people have easier access to money and more of it, whereas feminine people, they have less access to money and less of it.
I would actually wholeheartedly agree. You are the first person I've had an open discussion with that has kind of mirrored where I am in terms of my definition of masculinity. I basically agree with you in wholeheartedness.
Mm,
The only thing that I don't do is I don't identify my pronouns or
mhm,
anything of that nature
sure.
because I don't like to limit myself as much, and I just like
Mhm,
people to call me by my name or however they feel. But I do really agree with the fact in terms of that gender pay gap. I've actually studied this rather extensively and
mm,
finding out that that's actually a precipice of where I came up with the question, because when people talk about the pay gap, they're not exploring all the other options that exist within why that does exist. I mean, even down to the type of professions and jobs that are chosen. And then once in those positions, if you are more masculine leaning in your energy, you're going to
mhm.
be somebody who is more likely to ask for a raise or to negotiate for a higher salary. So I 100% agree that this is awesome. This is already off to an amazing start. I'm looking forward to this. And when I would use the word femininity, how would you define that?
I'll repeat something you just said. A characteristic of masculinity, and the Wikipedia article on masculinity and femininity, they talk about this. Assertiveness is traditionally associated with men, and humility, or Agreeability is associated with women, and that is one of the causes that people explore. To what extent does this affect uh, job advancement or access to money or these kinds of things? So assertiveness is something that I imagine. There's being conflict prone. The extent to which someone can handle conflict, be robust in conflict, initiate conflict, handle if someone directs conflict at them. Masculine people tend to thrive more in conflict prone environments than feminine people. That's something that plays out. There's pay gap implications of that as well. We can look to physical characteristics. Men have different body structure. There is a difference in the physical body. Men can do different sports than women. Weightlifting, there's a difference between men and women. Women have a mother experience, so that's key to women. Giving birth to a child, someone with female body parts, they can have this experience, whereas people with male body parts, they don't have this experience. And this traditional aspect, this legacy of tradition that we're coming out of centuries. Motherhood has a traditional connection with femininity. Things change nowadays. Parents have different kinds of roles, but the tradition is still there, and motherhood is something associated with femininity.
You know what? I would agree. I find it funny because this is kind of how I step out and look at things as well.
Mhm.
When I think about how society, technology, and then as well as just like that primitive brain that we do still possess,
Yeah.
all of these things are trying to act and exist accordingly. And in doing so, it does create cognitive dissonance, I believe.
Mhm.
And I believe that that occurs in times where we have a society now where we're not fighting off lions, tigers, and bears or
Yeah.
roving bands,
Yeah.
so you can allow, for want of a better term, that energy to exist more along the lines of a spectrum versus it being so rigidly defined. And I know that you mentioned in regards to like the physiology, of
Yeah.
course. I mean, the hip structure, a woman's hips tend to be wider and a man's hips being narrower
Mhm.
allows them to be more explosive, especially when it comes to sports like powerlifting, even standard weightlifting, and then even in gymnastics
Mhm.
because there's more allowance for flexibility in terms of what direction the body can bend and go. So this is awesome. You actually got me very excited about this.
Yep. Some
Um,
sports, it makes a difference. Weightlifting is one. Gymnastics, male gymnastics and female gymnastics are different sports. They do different moves. They have different routines. The male does not do the female routine, and the female do not do the male routine. It's designed for physiology. So there are certain cases where these things matter, but right now we're in a strange time that's happening now. It hasn't happened before in human history, where we're exploring what's open to innovation or changing. What do we really need to keep on to? What can we challenge or change? And this isn't just happening in the United States and Western Europe. These are concepts that are being explored everywhere. So concepts of masculinity and femininity, they might be different in, say, India, where they have their own traditions, their own notions of these things, and they're also changing them in ways that wouldn't necessarily match what's happening in the United States. Like, I don't think that the United States or the Western tradition has all the answers. We still
Agreed.
have to globalize this conversation and get opinions from people who don't speak English, who are from cultures that aren't connected to English, and who have their own ideas about these things.
I would agree. That's actually one reason why I do love language as a whole. I
Mm.
believe the more language that you know and the more languages that you understand, the more capable you are at actually describing the world and what's around you.
Mhm.
And without including that conversation globally, we've kind of just centralized it. And then it kind of what happened to medicine, a
Yes.
lot of good medicine was lost because it's going to be this way. We're going on germ theory, nothing else exists.
Mhm.
And this was the same issue that people had initially when
Yeah.
they went off the miasmic theory and, oh, if you can remove bad sense, then you remove the disease, you remove, the chance of getting sick. So I really agree with the fact that this needs to be a conversation that's opened up
Mhm.
because it's going to be different just about wherever you go. And that's going to be based on culture,
Yeah.
traditions, and at the same time, the way their environment will shape that mindset, that idea of how they're going to define, and go about existing in the world. I love the fact that you brought up India. I had a guest who was actually from Sri Lanka,
Mhm.
and that mindset and the idea of femininity and masculinity and how it is changing there and how it's quite different from the way it's changing here.
Mhm.
It's kind of it's mind expanding
Mhm.
versus it being something that is mind altering or narrowing. So 100% on board with that. Now, in regards to the expressions of masculinity and femininity. How do you find in your experience and just kind of going about your day in life, how do you find that that affects you as well as your sphere of influence and the people around you?
Some unusual things about me is I have this position of leadership and visibility as an LGBT rights advocate. I've been in this space for a long time. And so you were saying that in your personal life, you don't share pronouns. I'm in an LGBT space in a culture where this is considered necessary and essential information. So I'm routinely doing this as part of just my fluency and being part of this culture, because people want to know gender, they want to know how to respond. Many things are gender, and many people are pushing boundaries of gender and want to be conscious of these kinds of things. So people know me as male. People know me as cis male. People know me as a gay male, active in gay community rights and gay community culture. And uh, it's something that comes up in the forefront pretty quickly in almost all of my personal and professional relationships, that this is necessary context for people who are dealing with me, collaborating with me, or socializing with me, that they're going to see pretty quickly that I'm male, I'm masculine in this way, and I'm part of this culture that's sexuality and gender related.
No, definitely so, and that's why for myself, I'm 100% open
Hmm.
to being 100% incorrect on the way I view the world and see
Yeah,
it, and that's why I don't begrudge or dismiss anyone that
sure.
does choose to use pronouns, and I understand also that being a straight male, that there is a bit of a, I have the ability to be willfully ignorant
Hmm.
because it's a space that I'm not in at a regular basis.
Hmm.
It's also, just kind of a privilege in
Hmm.
reality,
Yeah.
especially when I step back and look at it, and that was actually something that I expressed with my wife when we were in our dating phases. Her brother, who is I guess to label him would be a homosexual male,
Hmm.
him and his partner, like, my wife is Latina,
Hmm.
and she's very light, so initially, we had, like, "Is anyone gonna say anything because we're this biracial couple?"
Yeah.
And then for me, it's like, "No, of course not." But then I think about her brother, and if we were hanging out anywhere outside of West Hollywood or anywhere in that area, they wouldn't hold hands and walk down the street out
Hmm.
of fear of reprisal, and that was something that was just I was completely blind to it.
Hmm.
I could never even consider that being a thing. Even going to family gatherings, when it was, like, the first time I went, I was like, "Oh, I wonder how they're gonna react that I'm black," and to them, him and his partner had to be perceived as friends for years.
Yeah.
For years, and I'm like, "Okay, that is a privilege that I have that I did not acknowledge," but actually having it pointed out, I think did better because instead of just being, a person who is willfully ignorant, it
Hmm.
allowed me to become a better ally and allowed me to become somebody who not only is gonna be conscious of it,
Hmm.
but someone who's also gonna let someone else know that they're safe because I can understand, especially how I present,
Yeah.
and, for the most part, I don't use many words, when it's in my normal life. A lot of people might think that I might be somebody who is extremely bigoted,
Hmm.
but ultimately, no, that's not me at all. I feel you should live and let live, and I enjoy, like, experiencing different cultures, different ideas, different identities, because
Yeah.
that allows me to expand my mind more. So, no, I agree. Would you mind going a little bit deeper into that, especially since you have such, a wealth of knowledge of, the gay, straight, lesbian, trans, and any other word I can't that I am missing, community?
I think you raised a point that puts this into context, and I don't think it's the gay trans LGBT issue that's the most pertinent here. I mean, that's the topic of the conversation, but you also raise the issue of race, and you raise the issue of safety. And the reason why people say pronouns, the reason why I make myself visible, and the reason why there's things like gay pride marches or LGBT marches is about oppression and violence and attacks and discrimination. So I'm in my 40s, and 20 years ago, I grew up in the United States. The United States was a much more dangerous place for LGBT people.
Yes.
And when I was in my 20s, every gay person that I knew at that time, they experienced physical assault. But by the time they're 25, like somebody comes after you, somebody physically threatens you, says I've got to attack your body or threaten your body. because I identify you as gay or LGBT or doing gender nonconforming,
The
some kind of
other.
situation. And from the LGBT community's perspective, it's people minding their own business, just wanting to live a regular life, and people come out of nowhere who have nothing to do with you. They disrupt your way of life and they say, "You got to change what you're doing. I don't like it, and you can't be visible in public about this." You mentioned something else, and I hope the day comes where young people don't understand this, but the concept of a biracial couple. Like, why would you even need a word for this? Like, whose
Agree.
business is it? Like, what's wrong with like, why do you notice the race, and why do you notice that two people are together and they're from different races? Like, why is this visible? And the reason why you brought that up is because there was a time not so long ago in the United States that if there's a biracial couple on the street, the appropriate and socially acceptable reaction is that somebody should physically assault them. That was the normal thing to do. And you would have organizations like the city hall, you would have local churches, you would just have the man on the street say, well, if they didn't want to be assaulted, they shouldn't have been walking together, they shouldn't have been visibly biracial and in a romantic relationship. The world used to be absolutely violent and insane, and we're not so far away from this. And even though things have gotten a little bit better in the United States, we shouldn't be comfortable with this. People have the right to live their own lives, make their own decisions about their demographic characteristics. And even if things were in the United States, I think it's the duty of people in the United States to look at other countries as well. And I'm not saying there's a line for colonial attitudes and there's a line for saying how much of another country's business should you get into. But personally, something that I feel is LGBT people in any country, in any culture, they should be safe. And it's not that I want to disrupt what another culture is doing, but a baseline that I set as my own personal values is that the only culture that's doing something right is the culture that's LGBT affirming and that lets LGBT people mind their own business peacefully without being subject to violence. And I would say the same thing about people of any race or any other demographic characteristic. It's better to
Yes.
let people live their own life, mind their own business without threat of violence. That's my underlying take on LGBT and a lot of other things.
I would agree. I mean, in all honesty, I am not one necessarily who's for, enforcing my ideas or anything like that on other countries. But if someone's life is in danger just because of how they choose to live their
Yeah,
life, especially when a lot of this is based in like religious traditions and
yeah,
taboos, and a lot of the people that perpetuate the violence typically are trying to suppress something within themselves.
yeah.
And for me, I do wonder this because I'm 6'1", 6'2", and then with shoes on 6'3". I have a bigger, wider build, and I wonder if I was a smaller man,
Mhm.
if my mentality would be different, because I've never felt fear of anything, especially going out and having, my wife who is not, of Black descent or African descent or however it would be,
Yeah.
kind of defined. And I do wonder at times if my mentality would be different because initially when I found out that and when I was in high school, I went to a humanities magnet, as a sidebar. When I found out that there were acts of violence being committed against these people,
Mhm.
my initial reaction was, well, then if that's the language that the other side would like to speak, then we need to speak in terms of acts of violence against them to get them to not do it.
Yeah.
And then getting to a point to where I'm older, I'm a new father, and I'm in a space to where I want to exist in a life that is a lot more peaceful
Mhm.
and a lot more understanding and, just a lot more being able to civilly discuss something, and if there's a disagreement at the end, that's fine, but that still does not remove the other person's humanity, and, one thing that I think that this really ties into is a book by Albert Camus, called The Painted Bird,
Okay.
and that book talks about how you can have a as an example, just you can walk into, an arboretum or a barium and have like birds flying all around. Their families, they've existed with each other for generations. However, if you pull one down and you paint it a different color and then you re-release it with those same birds, what those birds will do, although the bird itself that was painted does not change, they attack and kill it. And it's because it's the other, it's now different. It's now something that could threaten, the existence of their, environment and species. And I kind of feel like humans do the same thing. If
Yeah.
something's different, they choose not to understand it, instead they attack.
It's possible to have a more tolerant society, though, and I feel like because of globalization, because of things like internet, people talking with each other, people protesting, culture can change. And I'm not saying that maybe we have some deep-seated instinct, maybe there's some kind of otherness that humans are always going to detect, but I don't think we're anywhere near our limit for tolerance and compassion. I think society as a whole is trending to becoming more compassionate and tolerant, and it's something to explore. And I want to see. I also think that activism, having conversations, there's a kind of social technology that you can develop to help people have higher quality conversations that are more productive, impart understanding more quickly. And if you get this information out, like through Wikipedia, there's certainly some of my colleagues believe that if we edit these Wikipedia articles about the gender topics, sexuality topics, then people who need this information, they're going to read it and understand these things better, and they'll be more compassionate and more informed. I do think there are things that people can do to have a path to a better future and a better society.
I would agree. For me personally, I do believe that a lot of that starts with people not hating themselves as much,
Hmm.
because I've noticed that people who tend to have a more content way of life,
Hmm.
and I do believe diet plays into this as well, but I do believe people that have a more content way of life tend to be a little bit more understanding because they don't feel like their resources are being threatened. And then when you have someone who is in fear of losing their resources, I believe they act a lot less logically and a lot more instinctively. And typically, that's never really a good choice or a good option, especially when you exist in a society. And I think what people forget is that we have laws in this country. And instead of, following and running alongside those laws, or even if you take it to someone who is extremely religious,
Hmm.
you have people who have laws within their religion and they choose to, basically willfully ignore some.
Hmm.
Because if you have Christians, you have Muslims, you have people of those religions who can become fanatic, and when they go fanatical, they're attacking people with violence, when the basis of their text, for the most part, is you should be kind, you should be gentle, you should be loving. So
Yeah.
I do find that really odd that people tend to just revert to that "let's be violent," and then as a whole, social media, when it was initially established, as well as the internet, it allowed people to interact with, other societies, other cultures. Like, I've had an opportunity to have this discussion with people from Dubai,
Hmm.
from Sri Lanka, and different areas around the world, and the thing that I find so troubling is that with this technology and with the ability to do this, most people decide to just kind of stay within a room that reflects their already current built ideas,
Hmm.
and then it just kind of makes them a little bit more fringe, and then they become a little bit more erratic, and then that's when you have people who are just, standing in these echo chambers, and then it becomes that us versus them
Hmm.
versus an us trying to obtain understanding.
Hmm. So I want to respond in a couple of ways. Like, one of the things I want to describe something that happens at gay pride festivals. So I've got this relationship. I go to these events. Many major cities have a gay pride event, a large gathering. What happens at these things? So one of the things that happens is a parade in the streets. Spectators can come and see this. Sometimes there's music or dancing, some kind of party environment that happens too. Something else that happens is some visibility. So gay people meet other gay people, people you wouldn't normally encounter in your life. Social networking happens. People trade notes. I've been going to gay pride events for a good part of my life. Different experiences every time, but and this isn't every experience, and this isn't the happiest thing. But sometimes at these events, I ask people, how have things been going? Any troubles? And I ask them, have you been subject to any kind of LGBT discrimination? Has anyone attacked you for being LGBT? What are you facing? And my expectation, even now, I did this last year. I knew what the answer was going to be, but every gay person has a story about experiencing some kind of serious discrimination. And if you didn't have the social technology of saying there's going to be a gay pride event, people are going to get together and people are going to exchange notes, there's a lot of LGBT people in the world who think I experience discrimination, but no one else does. This is an unusual experience that I'm having. And they'll say that I experience discrimination. It tends to come more from people of a certain political party. Whatever country this is, can be a different party in different country. I experience this kind of discrimination from people of a certain religion. There's different religions prominent. I'm not talking about any particular religion, but it often happens that politics or ideology or religion is an instigating factor or risk factor that means that these people can be a bit dangerous. They're a bit intolerant. They've got some kind of ideology in their head that tells them what you were saying about my resources are being threatened. These ideologies, they put the idea in people's head that if there's gay people walking around on the street, and they seem to be minding their own business, then in the act of living a daily normal life, somehow some kind of harm is going to come to you just from the existence of these people. And I'd like to put the idea out that there's such a thing as demographic characteristics, and that includes like race and your ideology, your creed, all the things that non-discrimination policies say don't discriminate against these things. That when you're forming these ideas about people because of one of the demographic characteristics that gets tracked, they really need to be left alone on those ideas. Free to live a life, free to visibly say that I'm part of this is part of my identity. I have this characteristic. They shouldn't need to hide it. And as long as you have people of a certain demographic complaining, we're getting attacked, this should be taken very seriously. If we go, okay, so that's one point. Another point is about the language we use and the way that we talk about things.
Yes.
Younger
Yeah.
people might not realize this. And even if you're not in the space of looking at media studies, looking at the way people talk about things, you might not realize this. But a lot of the vocabulary that we use nowadays, it's recently invented. These words weren't used 100 years ago. They were barely used 50 years ago. But words like discrimination, assault, harassment, stalking. These are words that recently people know what these words mean in the United States, but these words were not part of the public discourse. And if there was some minority that experienced these things 50 years ago, they would not talk about these things using the vocabulary we would know now, and they wouldn't even understand these concepts in the way that we know now. So when this stuff is happening, it's almost like harassment is a modern discovery that didn't people weren't aware even existed 50 years ago. And some people say, well, it's always been this way. It really hasn't always been this way. We just discovered harassment. We're just now starting to measure how often this happens and to whom it happens. And the conversation that says, okay, we have this many people who are saying they get harassment from this demographic, we can put that on the table now and then go to these demographics and say, hey, does your church include non-tolerant behavior? Or does your political party encourage, is it correlated with violence? And what does that mean if we get all these reports that a certain amount of violence is coming from your political party? Do you have a violent ideology? Or is this some foundation in hate? Is this intentional? Like what is the cause of this? Like why are there so many reports that this institution feels so threatened by the existence of these other people who seem to be what is your evidence that they're taking your resources? Like why are you so threatened? Can we have a conversation about this? I think these are conversations that we can have now that would have been impossible to have even 20 years ago.
I agree because as you said, the language in itself evolved. I mean, when you think of a word like harassment, you had a time where, there was a workplace and a workforce, and
Mhm.
then you had women coming into the workforce, and then the treatment that they received, there was no word, there was no form, there was no meaning for harassment, so it was invisible. Although the action and the feeling was still there. I
That's right.
completely agree with that, especially when it comes to language. Language is something that's very powerful. When I
Mhm.
was younger, I mean, like, before high school, I mean, young, young, young. "Oh, that's gay. Oh, that's
Mhm.
this. Oh,
Yep.
that's that," and it was a negative term. So,
Yes.
like, in your mind, you're subconsciously reinforcing that these are negative things. These are things that are gonna play off on you.
Yes.
T to me, I have been relatively accepting for most of my life
Mhm.
because I've always looked at it as long as someone is doing what they're doing and they're not harming anyone or anyone around them about it, and they're being truthful, then I'm 100% on board for it. One thing I do think that the world can benefit from, especially in American culture, is having conversations like this because it allows people to see a different perspective. I am a person who the very first time I went to Pride, I was, like, in 2010 or 2011,
Mhm.
with my now wife,
Mhm.
and I've been to quite a few of them. I've been to Long Beach, Palm Springs, Los Angeles, and for me, out of all of them, I prefer Palm Springs the most, typically because it has an older crowd and older setting, and I
Mhm.
do feel like the Los Angeles and Long Beach has become so commercialized.
Yeah.
It's no longer about the message that it was before. It's just now about,
Marketing. It encroaches in the activism. Yes.
exactly, exactly, and for me, I remember it was the first time I saw, leather daddies and stuff like that, and I'm like,
Mhm.
"Wow, this is odd.
Mhm.
I've never seen this in my life." But at the same time, I just saw that they were people. They were marching down the street.
Mhm.
and then afterwards you go to a bar, you have a drink, they're just people you're in a drink having a bar with.
Yeah.
And that was the time that they introduced, it was like the jukebox where you can actually pick your own song, but it was from your phone. It was like a digital jukebox that had, like,
Okay.
all the
Okay.
songs, and I remember, like, I was there with my wife, her brother, as well as his partner, and we played the Game of Thrones theme song, and
Mhm.
then we just thought it was gonna be hilarious, and everyone started, like, swaying their beers back and forth and doing it, and it was this moment of connection, and there were straight people in the bar, there were, of course, gay people in the bar, and everything in between, and you had this, like, joined excitement, and there was just, like, this split second, this mild moment of people just existing as people, not what they were defined as, not what they were seen to be, and just normal, everyday human beings. I mean, for myself, I used to love going to West Hollywood with my wife to go watch, like, UFC fights.
Mhm.
UFC fights there where the bars are relatively empty.
Mhm.
They had 2 for 1 drinks, like, we used to go to a place, I think it's pretty much everywhere, in Fiesta Cantina. They have 2 for 1 drinks, their beers are really good, and then the people that were there, male, female, and everything in between, were there because they were really interested in the fight. And I've noticed that when I would go to a straight bar, these are not people necessarily interested there because they wanted to be there for the fight. They were just there because they wanted to be rowdy and out and drinking and doing things like
Sure.
that. So I think people do forget that we do share things in common. And when we think about the other, we kind of create this enemy that is just so vile and evil. And we remove that humanity, making it easier to say and do these destructive things to them and their culture and their society and make ourselves feel better for doing it. When if you actually look at that person to where it's like, this is a human being,
Mhm.
this is a person. This is a person that has ideals,
Yeah.
whether it's a person that is, of a different gender or, persuasion, or it's a person who is a white supremacist and, they feel like that white nationalism is the way to go.
Yeah.
For me, is like as long as you let that person exist and be in their feeling and be in their moment, and
Mhm.
you give them an opportunity to see the humanity in you as well as you in them, I think that we can move towards that time in life where people are more accepting. And we know it'll never be 100%, but it can get to a point to where it's at least safe, to where you don't need a green book to travel around an
Yeah.
area because you're a person of color. It should be completely fine that if somebody is of whatever persuasion or gender preference, that
Yeah.
they can exist and be in themselves without the threat of violence. And it needs to get to a point in our society where that threat of violence is removed because the law places major restrictions on that, and the laws that we currently have are just enforced. I 100% agree with you. This is an awesome conversation. I love where this is going.
Well, you're talking about this top-down strategy, but what the story you told, that's a bottom-up strategy. So the idea that there would be a bar in a community, it's not the government that makes the bar. It's the community. Some business owner says, "I'm gonna establish this community space. People can come in off the streets and people can socialize, and all kinds of people can come to socialize." And that you've had that experience. So that's a certain privilege. So there's privileges that urban people get. This exposure to diversity, the exposure to people from other kinds of backgrounds. And I don't expect everybody in the world to be fluent in every culture. And I'm not saying that if you're from a rural area that you need to understand what it's like to live a life of a person you're not going to meet. Like I just don't expect people to invest their time and resources trying to understand personal experiences that they're not going to encounter. But at the same time, I do expect I expect I wish I want it to be the case that people can have enough understanding of diversity to say, okay, this person's this person, this is different, this is different, this is different. Have that little experience and say, I understand differences now, and I'll be tolerant of differences in general, even when I encounter a new difference. You mentioned the idea of racial supremacist. While if somebody's walking on the street, anybody has a right to walk on the street and certain other personal rights. Personally, I draw the line at all intolerance. I don't like anyone who goes out in public spaces, even in the context of free speech, and maybe I would even put barriers in front of free speech when somebody says a demographic of society has no right to exist. I will tolerate anything except intolerance, and this is a sentiment that many other people have arrived at. That what will you allow and won't you allow? And I draw the line at saying it's never okay for someone to start talking badly about another demographic or discriminating on the basis of identity. No intolerance in society is where I would draw the line.
For me, the I think the reason why I have the idea and mindset,
Mhm.
and also I would like to address, I'm 100% bottom up. When I mention law and when I mention the government,
Yeah.
that's because we the people are the law, we are the
Okay,
government.
yes, I got it.
Yeah,
A very,
yeah.
very American, concept, sure.
Yeah, and for me, I'm as American as it can be, and I do find that I have a privilege being a person of color,
Mhm,
the spaces and the words and the things that I can say because I am a person of color.
mhm,
Now, the reason why I see or American of color, that's the word I like to use. What the one thing I do when I say, someone who is intolerant in terms of race or gender or things like that, as long as they're not committing acts of violence and they're remaining within the spectrum of law.
mhm,
So I played baseball all through high school, college, all of that, and the majority of players that I played with that came from a rural area
mhm.
or even when here in Los Angeles, a person who was they presented and said that they were racist. They were white supremacists. That was the
Yeah.
way they went about it. It was a guy I played with, and I won't use his name,
Mhm,
but there was a time where we played a game and we were in Los Angeles, and that team was predominantly white, and I was pitching in that game. I hit a guy and they rushed me. The first guy there was him. So it's like I understand that he has those concepts and those ideas, but he was able to play with me, be around me, and see me as a person and saw that I had stand-up character. And I think that through that, you can start removing that veil of hate that people have because a lot of that hate exists because you don't have experience in it or you don't have an opportunity to see anything other than what's being presented either by the media or by your own personal biases in terms of what you choose to consume. I believe the gentleman's name is Daryl Jackson. I might be getting his name wrong, but he's actually converted multiple, grand wizards within the KKK just by talking to him and then becoming friends, and that person saying, "I need to turn my robe in because this is just wrong." And I think through that existence and allowing it to be open, you have an opportunity for people to become understanding of each other. And for me, if there's, like, protests and riots well, not riots, but protests. To me, BLM protest or the white nationalist protest, they both need to be allowed to exist as long as they remain peaceful, because to me, that is what it means to be an American. You have the right to voice your opinion. And for me, I can't put any restrictions on free speech because when you begin to start putting restrictions on free speech, it could be geared and, focused on anything. Like, let's say that they took that approach to, what we're discussing right now and saying, well, you know what? If anyone is other than this, we're going to suppress their ability to get out there and march and provide illumination to the traumas and the horrors that they face.
mhm,
And I think for the most part, people in general, in their hearts, they understand when they're doing something wrong, but that mob mentality can create a way to where you can justify it and make it okay. But when you realize that this is a person that you're doing this to, a person who's just doing what you're trying to do, they're trying to just exist. And I think that that allows for an opportunity for us to kind of speed up the race towards understanding and tolerance. And I think tolerance is the right word because if you're in a rural town, and you never saw an Asian person,
mhm,
and the first time you see an Asian person walking down the street, instead of yelling something at them because you've never seen them,
mhm,
you just continue on about your day. I think that's just fine right there, even if you feel a certain way about it, you
mhm,
know? Just don't act on it, just be human, just follow the laws and understand that we're all people and that those laws apply to all of us, and that if a crowd of people or the people in general get together and say, "You know what? This is not okay," that changes the mentality and that becomes the enforcement of the laws. Like the Bill of Rights, the Declaration of Independence, these are all things that when you apply it as a whole and you remove like personal interpretation from it,
mhm,
it's something that I think can help advance all of these issues in society quite forward. Because you have people who will say that they stand up for the Second Amendment and your right to bear arms,
mhm.
but then at the same time, you have a gay pride parade and they say that's evil and it's horrible and that shouldn't be allowed to exist.
Yeah.
That's a person who's living, and just they're living in a terms of not accepting everything and only what pertains to them.
So I'm a university researcher, and I'm doing this thing in Wikipedia, and I'd like to say something about Wikipedia and free speech. You raise the issue, like, what limit should there be on free speech? Should we just say free speech is the best strategy in all cases, or like where are the fuzzy areas? Where do new issues come up? And Data science, we're talking about artificial intelligence. So new things are happening. We have different ways of pushing a button on a computer, and the computer can give answers that humans are not going to arrive at. Humans can look at a huge amount of information and come to conclusions that once the computer gives the answer, a human can check it and say, yeah, the evidence seems to be pointing to this. But it's not that the computer right now is doing things that a human wouldn't do. It's just that it does it so quickly and so cheaply that it's possible to ask basic questions that were too complicated for humans to ever pay or invest to sort out, and the computer can come up with these answers. So, about intolerance. Supposing you have a claim that people of a certain political ideology or some kind of background, ideology of any kind, and there's an accusation that this this people of this ideology, they're higher risk or produce higher amount of violent incidents. And you have other people who say, I'm victimized by this ideology. The people of this ideology are attacking me, and that they have these different kind of reports. It could be the case that even if you have a major city, Los Angeles, Houston, one of the big cities in America, that they've always had demographics, they've always had researchers counting these kinds of things. But either the data is too tangled, it's in too many places. Maybe you can't discover these insights unless you're not looking at one city. You're pulling the data out of 10 cities, or maybe pulling the data out of every city in a country and then trying to determine some kind of trend. We're not quite there yet in practice, but in theory and in terms of technology and in terms of data, we're getting very close to the point where every kind of offense, every kind of complaint, every kind of crime statistic can be dropped on a table, pushed into a computer, and we can say, here's all the demographics and here's all the characteristics of this kind of assault or this kind of intolerance. And this group, there seems to be a statistical trend that this group is attacking this group. If we don't have that kind of data and evidence on the table, many people have said, you're just imagining this. Like, this data is too complicated. It's actually both groups attacking each other. But I think we're going to have a different kind of conversation when we get these statistics under control and these data under control. And maybe when these reports are first released, people will say, well, you've just got one report. I don't really believe this. But if we get the same evidence year after year, it becomes more firm that this is the conclusion, that this ideology spawns hate, and this ideology is more tolerant and makes for a more peaceful, more efficient society in so many ways, social efficiency and business efficiency and everything else. So in Wikipedia, for different kinds of articles, we can look at things like harassment or assault of LGBT people, harassment or assault of women, claims of harassment of women in the workplace. We can go to other issues like gun violence by city, by state. Like, to what extent is violence an issue, and can we track every incident of gun violence and report in Wikipedia or any other neutral platform? Like, what is the evidence on the table? What do we have? What do we report here? You were talking about traditional medicine, like modern medicine takes over in so many ways, but there's cases where traditional medicine has been better than modern medicine for whatever reason. Or you can talk about controversies in modern medicine. It just happened today that there was a Nobel Prize announced for the developers of the COVID vaccine. And despite this, and despite all the evidence, there's people who say COVID vaccines are harmful, or they're skeptical. Vaccine hesitancy. They're skeptical of the concept of a vaccine in general, and the COVID vaccine in particular. Should we have free speech? A question we struggle with. We have people who come to Wikipedia articles and say, why does the article on COVID vaccines so heavily say that COVID vaccines are safe and that people should take them? Why don't you put the other side of the argument, the other information that says COVID vaccines are dangerous? Or when you talk about assault against LGBT people, why don't you have Wikipedia articles that present all the offenses and crimes of LGBT people? Because those are in excess of the amount of assaults that are towards LGBT people. So when people start saying these things, like, let's have a conversation about both sides of the issues, what I think is going to happen because of artificial intelligence, because of computer monitoring, because of better tracking. If somebody communicates something, they send their ideas to another city, and those ideas go to another city. We're about to have a network where we're getting very high quality information from a lot of people all over the world about a lot of issues. And I think one of the things that we're going to find is that some demographics are very right about things, and some demographics are wrong, especially the intolerant. My bet is on the tolerant people tend to be more right about things, and the intolerant people are underestimating just how much of a cost to society in terms of finance, productivity, safety, social cohesion. Um, I think intolerance is going to be proven to be statistically a big drain on society in a lot of ways. And I think when people express intolerant views in the very near future, if they say it online, it's going to be flagged. This is a minority fringe view. The evidence doesn't point to this. You shouldn't adopt this ideology. And I think this is going to come from different social media and other kinds of media platforms. That free speech is going to have a different place in society when absolutely anything a person says can be fact checked by an AI immediately, and that when people are saying these things in a group, anyone can pull out their phone and say, "You're just not with the you're just not having conventional views. You're on the fringe," and calling people out immediately.
That I agree with. Now, I kind of liken that to the original of being able to have a cell phone that had internet capability, and you
What
can
a
use
change,
something like
right? What
Google.
a change.
Correct, because there were so many arguments about, as an example, "Oh, did Michael Jordan score this many points in the game or did he
Yeah,
not?" And you have
yeah,
2 people arguing because they feel like they're correct. But then became a time where you could literally Google and say, "No, he scored 43 points in this
yeah,
game." So
yeah,
you can have a right and a wrong, opinion, so
yeah,
to speak.
yes.
And I do think AI, I don't have a I don't think I have enough knowledge on AI to have much of an opinion on it,
Sure.
although I do see the propensity for good when it comes to that. The only thing that does scare me is what I understand about the algorithm in terms of like a YouTube algorithm or a Google algorithm and how that can kind of be tailored and kind of just that is the one time I come to, like, a bit of a fear from it, because I look at, like, a YouTube algorithm and how that operates and works, and what that does is it takes the idea of the group, so to speak, and it just basically kinda drills down on that. So if I'm somebody who, for example, is interested in, a guy like Nick Fuentes or perceived white nationalism or something like that, if I'm a person that Google searches that, so instead of getting that differing opinion, it only gives me a more detailed version of what I'm already looking for.
Mhm.
I think that that has a cause for, potential violence and just being dangerous. But in terms of AI and how it works, I think AI would be the way we need to go versus our legal system,
Mhm.
because anytime that you can put law, something that has a defined law, a defined definition to it, so to
Yeah.
speak, and then you incorporate, feelings and emotion, and that's why a person who has a lot more money is able to get off more of the time
Yes.
because they can have someone to argue their point better versus
Yeah.
it being a computer. It's, well, did you commit the crime? Yes or no. And I think that would be a better, use of it. RoboCop kind of pops into my
Yeah.
mind when I think about it and how they were going away from the live human police officers to the robotic ones, as long as the AI, the input method into the AI, like just like a math problem, as
Mhm.
long as the input method is as I wouldn't even use the word tolerant there, I would say fair
Mhm.
as possible and without as much emotion as possible, I do think that that can lead to a point in history where we get to where it's like, well, you're just wrong. Like, if you think that there's a difference between white and black and
Yeah.
that people are different, then you're just wrong. Like, you're just wrong. Fact, you're just the fact is you are incorrect, and
Yeah.
here's how you're incorrect.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's gonna actually lead to a lot of openings for people, and then I do think that it is gonna drive certain people deeper into their corners, into their holes, and into those fringe ideals and societies, but I do hope that that becomes or actually it currently is already now, but I hope that further becomes the norm is people are open to other ideals, and if they're not open to other ideals, they don't act on them, they don't act against them violently or, systemically. They just allow it to exist and just say it's something I disagree with.
Mhm. So, I I do think you understand something important about AI, and that it's gonna support people in answering their questions. If somebody wants to make an argument about something and doesn't quite know what to say, right now they can do it to some extent. In the future, it's gonna be so much easier and so much better that to make an argument, um, what what good comes from LGBT people, what bad comes from LGBT people. You can pose any question to an AI and it's going to give these kind of answers. And I hope and I expect that AI is going to report, because I think this is the objective truth, that tolerance and diversity is better for society. And I think that no matter what background someone comes from, if they consult and have conversations with these AIs, AI is going to point them in those kinds of ways. One of the commonly discussed limits of AI is that it's no better than the data that you put into it. It needs a certain amount of data. People point out the problems with current AI. This is when people are talking about AI nowadays, they're often talking about the limits. We're talking about masculinity and femininity. So, for example, you can ask an AI, show me a picture of a professor, and people have done this, and it shows a picture of an old white male. So is
Yes.
that what a professor is? Like, do you need to be old and white and male to be a professor? Or show me what a doctor looks like. Show me what a politician looks like. Give me these pictures. And right now, the AI is making racial decisions, gender decisions, a lot of other identity decisions about who should be represented when people want to see a particular profession or who does different things. If you show, I want to see a picture of sports players. Like, who is it going to show for that? What do these kind of people look like? So right now, I'm sympathetic. I agree. Everyone who criticizes AI for its shortcomings and for its biases, it does have a lot of biases. Something that I think people aren't prepared enough for is that if you come up with a list of every problem in AI, I think most of the problems that people would list are pretty easy problems that are going to be solved within 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. But once we've solved all the easy problems, there's going to be other problems that remain. And these are social and ethical problems that even if you get a room full of the best humans, they're going to have trouble solving.
Of course.
And and AI is not going to be able to solve those problems, I think. Like, there's still a place for humans, but AI is definitely going to change a lot of conversations and a lot of worldviews.
I agree. It's a lot like the steam engine and when the train came along. Originally, people were terrified and afraid of trains because
Yeah.
they thought there were spirits that were moving the thing and this was sacrilegious. And now you get to a point to where there's a much better understanding. And so over time, the concept of the train got better
Yeah.
and continued to evolve. And I kind of see it happening that way with AI, or at least I hope that's the direction that it goes. Because I do believe that people having an opportunity to have good conversation and to be able to expand on it, I do think that that is a vehicle for change. As an example, we're here talking about masculinity and femininity
Mhm.
and how that kind of bleeds into all these other different things.
Yes.
Because typically, when someone thinks of a masculine person, they think of a particular type of male. Like
Yes.
if you Google masculine, you're gonna get more than likely some big, fit, ripped guy with a chiseled jawline. And there's so many areas within the spectrum of what masculinity is and how it exists. I mean, if you think about it, masculinity exists in both or exists everywhere. In any gender, you
Yes.
have the polarity of both energies because
Mhm.
you can't be all of one without the other. You'd be just too top heavy for want of a better term. You tip over and, be detrimental to yourself. So I do think that having conversations like this is going to allow us to get to a position in society where we do become more understanding and we do become more tolerant. And I love the word choice of tolerant, because you're not saying that you need to do what the other person is doing to be in agreement. You're just saying you need to tolerate it. And tolerance is such a low bar. I think we can meet that. I would hope we can meet that.
Well, I'll tell you one of the places where tolerance comes into conflict. So, common story at gay pride events. Talk to other people, ask them where they came from. You can ask people, did you come out to your family? Do you still talk to your family? There's a lot of people who think they're tolerant, but have the idea that they have an ideology, wherever that comes from, that if someone's LGBT outside of their family, then they'll stay away from them and just not interact. But what if it's your kid? What if your kid comes out as gay or trans? And there's a heck of a lot of LGBT people who at some point in their teenage years, they make a decision. Do I tell my parents this or do I hide it? And they'll hide it for a little while and they think, okay, do I come out or do I not come out? And some people, when they come out or get found out, their family kicks them out. Whatever they think about tolerance, it's not happening anymore. And at that point, when you have a family that's expelling someone into society, in my opinion, that family they're making a burden on society. When you kick your kid out, if they're underage, then society's got to take care of them. So you're absconding from your responsibility to take care of a kid that you're required to take care of. And even if you have someone in their early 20s and you're not legally obligated to take care of them, but you expel them from their society. And in America, we expect, or the society is, I'm not saying we expect this, but society is designed for parents to take care of kids and have a familial relationship, even after the age of 18, after the age of adulthood. And when you have so many LGBT people reporting, I'm estranged from my family because my family has these views, wherever these views come from, then I think that does become other people's business, because you have people who experience people with a lot of potential who experience homelessness and who experience trouble getting their education and going into the workforce, all these kinds of delays. There's a certain amount of vulnerability to being suddenly kicked out of your house and having to make it on the streets and in the world when you're not financially prepared and don't have the social skills to navigate what does it mean to be adulthood if your family hasn't prepared you for this. And it creates just a negative atmosphere to even have someone like that come to an LGBT community center. On one hand, that's why LGBT community centers exist, to help receive people like this who don't have any friends, who maybe had to leave their city, leave a rural area and go to the big city so that they could connect with an LGBT center and get their life in some kind of order, transition to adulthood. This happens so much in so many different cities. It takes so much money and puts so much negativity in the world that sometimes I do think it is other people's business to get in your life when you're doing something that has a significant cost to society. Somebody's got to turn off the faucet, say we can't let this run anymore. Someone needs to address this at the source and say you can't be causing this kind of disruption into society anymore. You need to think about this.
I really agree with you. I wish we had more to disagree on, but I completely agree with you. It's, even after the age of 18, having that connection to your family, even if you're, financially independent,
Yeah,
having that support, and what that does is that casts someone out into the world, into society,
yeah,
that begins to hate themselves because if the people that are supposed to love them
yeah,
don't love them anymore and can cast them away like garbage,
yeah,
that just creates this it's like this almost a they become it's like if you look at it in terms of odds and statistics, it makes them more likely to make poor decisions in life
absolutely. It
versus it,
does.
being the other way. And I do think that that type of involvement needs to exist. I do think that as a society, there needs to be a bit of a safety net because I look at it as, let's say it cost $100 to help prevent that person from becoming a drain or a detriment to society
Yeah.
versus them becoming a drain or a detriment to society that now costs thousands of dollars.
Yes.
I'm all about, picking up the dollars versus stepping over them to pick up the change. Uh,
Prevention.
yes, 100%.
Instead of fixing a problem, it's cheaper to prevent it.
Yes. Yes, and I came across that, when I was, looking into researching about, like, the crime bills of the early '90s and actually even in the '80s in terms of what that led to and what that cost to society,
Mhm.
and the cost to correct and fix and prevent is so much cheaper than the cost to incarcerate or to, you know, kind of put a Band-Aid on versus
Mhm.
actually addressing, and I do think that there needs to be these LGBTQ centers. I do think that that needs to exist, and I also think that if people can open up a little bit more and have an open heart, even if there's let's say there's tiers of it. There's a person who's tolerant, therefore they won't commit any acts of violence, but they want no involvement in it.
Yeah.
That's fine. But the people that are around, someone that can say, "You know what? Pick yourself up," that can provide information to those parents to understand that, well, this is still my child.
Yeah.
Regardless of what decisions that they make in life, this is still my offspring. to me, and this kind of comes from, like, my traditional values, especially my traditional values of masculinity, that there's a duty that you need to perform regardless of how you feel about it at a certain point.
Mhm.
For me, I have a 3-month-year old, and my wife and I kinda go back and forth about this, and she's like, "Well, what if he's, gay or trans or anything in between?" And I tell her, It's my son, I'm gonna love him. If he wants to be he's gonna have all the opportunity in the world that I can afford him, that I can sacrifice to create for him, and
Yeah.
if he decides he doesn't wanna go to school, he doesn't wanna work in life, he wants to live under a bridge and be homeless, and that will be his existence, I will make sure he is the best at living under a bridge and being homeless and having that existence, because I want him to be able to make those choices for himself,
It's
and I
about
want
personal
him to
agency. If
understand that.
Yeah, if you give people personal agency, a lot of people believe, I believe that if you have more choices in life, you tend to s people tend to select the best ones.
I
Giving
agree.
people choices is a pathway to success.
I agree, and I mean, for myself, I consider myself lucky because I didn't grow up in a great neighborhood, I didn't grow up in a great environment.
Mhm,
I just got lucky. A lot of what, the people that I went to junior high, the people excuse me, not junior high, but elementary school with, a lot
mhm,
of them are dead or in jail or have records, and
yeah.
they're trying to be good in society again, but there's that wall and that prevention that's in front of them, and I find myself lucky because there were times I was doing things I should not have been doing, but I was able either to talk my way out of it or I just wasn't the one who got caught at something. So I do think that the more options and the opportunities that people have, the more better choices that people actually make for themselves. Bad choices tend to occur and happen when you feel like you're limited and restricted, and that's the only option available versus being somebody who has opportunity and options available to where they don't have to get kicked out at a young age or even an older age, and then they have to enter into prostitution or something along those lines, so, to provide for themselves. And then the amount of just trauma that creates because they're now placed in a position to where they're doing something that they don't want to do, but they're doing it for survival, and the way that that kind of perverts or mutates their view of the world, because now you do have good and bad, because there are going to be good and bad experiences, and typically if you're in a situation like that, you're going to experience more bad in life, creating a more negative outlook on life, making it easier for you to commit crime, and then so on and so forth. I feel it's like a slippery slope. So I do wish we had more to disagree about, but I love the fact that this is the conversation we have because I don't get to have these conversations often, which was a major motivating factor of me wanting to have a podcast, to have uncomfortable conversations, because I do feel that they're necessary to have better understanding. Because I'm definitely not somebody who, 25, 30 years ago was able to say that, if why can't I say something's gay? Why can't I say this? Why don't I have the right to say these words? And then I get to the point where it's like, yeah, it's not that I don't have the right to say them or not say them. It's just that there's certain things I shouldn't do because that's energy that I don't want to incorporate into my own being. Because what that does is it just sullies my own soul and it
Mhm.
prevents me from being understanding and being open to other individuals. So I really enjoy this. And I know we're coming up or we're actually already over the hour, so, like, I don't wanna keep you too long, but you're a person I've had an amazing conversation with. Would you ever be open to coming onto the show for any other topics or subjects, especially related to AI?
Sure, I'd come back, we could talk about AI sometime. Thanks for having me for this topic, I really appreciate it.
No problem. Now, are there any ways to find you, anything that you'd like to plug and talk to the community about? Even resources, resources that you're aware of that can help direct and steer someone there who may be dealing with, issues of gender identity or being able to define what is masculine versus what is feminine and the kind of restrictions that that would place on them.
I'm just gonna plug Wikipedia. So Wikipedia, it's a nonprofit project. It's established in 2001. The goal of Wikipedia is to provide the best possible information on every topic that's been covered in reliable sources. It's a general reference encyclopedia for anyone who has questions about gender or sexuality or anything related to these topics. Go into Wikipedia, check out the articles. If there's some source or some perspective that you feel is missing from the Wikipedia article, anybody can edit Wikipedia. That's the gimmick with the platform. There's an edit button. You can make a Wikipedia account, and there's a talk page on every Wikipedia article also. You can go to the talk page and say, "Hey, I found this source. I'd like it integrated into the article with these facts," or you can just edit the article and do it yourself. So I'm going to plug Wikipedia, and for gender-related topics specifically, go to any of the gender groups. There's an LGBT studies group. There's a women's studies group. And there's a lot of other groups that focus on different aspects of gender or sexuality. lots of other collaborators are available online to anyone who goes to Wikipedia and wants to talk about these topics.
Much appreciated. I'll ask you to hang tight as I get ready to end the recording,
Mhm.
just so we can kind of, do a couple, like I like to say paying bills, although it doesn't pay any bills because this is not monetized, but that way we kinda just wrap that up.
Sure.
Everyone out there in the spectrum that had an opportunity to listen to this episode today, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to incorporate this information into your life. And with all the hopes and wishes in the world, I say, please look into what tolerance is. Try to incorporate that into your life and your lifestyle, and just accept that there are people that are different from you, and that that's completely okay. Now, from Civil Rhetoric and everyone out this way, including Lane Rasberry over here, thank you so much and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks so much, Larry.